probably only a couple of people who don't know who I am, and for them, I'm Dennis Jett, professor of International Affairs in the School of International Affairs, and very happy today to welcome a old friend and colleague, Harry Thomas. Most of you have seen his biography, but just to touch on a couple points, Harry was ambassador 3 times, Zimbabwe, the Philippines, and Bangladesh. He was also executive secretary in the State Department, special assistant to Secretary Rice, director for South Asian Affairs at the National Security Council, director of the Operations Center, and Director General of the Foreign Service and Director of Human Resources, which is the top personnel officer in the State Department. Now, for those of you who haven't been in government, or particularly in the State Department, you might wonder, why can't he keep a job? For those of us who have been in the State Department, it's pretty easy to recognize that he had an amazingly successful career, and it's just a tribute to his professionalism and the confidence that various secretaries of state and various presidents over many years have put in Harry, and that he has held so many positions of great trust and confidence. And he did it all, despite the fact that we worked together in 1992 in the Undersecretary's office. But he went on to greatness, and it's terrific to have him here because there's probably nobody better equipped to speak about the subject today, Kashmir, and which will be the subject, of course, of the simulation over the next 2 days. So, Harry, thank you again for being here, and take it away.
Thank you, sir. I usually start by taking a selfie, but you guys are kind of 40, 60, so we'll wait to the end. But good afternoon. I'm pleased to be in Happy Valley. Thanks for inviting me. My friends told me to say, we're supposed to say, we are. And safe. Okay, that's wonderful, wonderful. I'm truly honored that my distinguished and courageous colleague, Ambassador Dennis Jett, asked me to address this gathering. Although I would have appreciated him bringing me here on a football weekend, I lived in Srinagar and Kashmir for much of 1995 to 96 as part of a broad-based effort supported by the Indian government to secure the release of Western hostages. We failed. I'll return to that issue. This is Kashmir. Want you to have a sense of it. More importantly, this is Abel and Cain. India, the subcontinent. People who really were the same religion. Brothers. So these wars between families never seem to end. But when looking at the challenges and policy solutions, the Foreign Service leadership always taught us to understand the local environment, ask if the citizens' needs were being met, present attainable opportunity solutions that provide safety, security, and opportunity in alignment with the national government's sovereignty. They stress that military intervention buys you space, but is rarely the final solution. At the same time, we were told to understand that decision makers in faraway capitals may have little concern or knowledge for those in troubled regions. You know how far Islamabad and New Delhi are from the valley. My talk will center on this hapless valley and ask you to decide what should be the global community and indeed America's policy. Now, the mere mention of Kashmir's future evokes emotive responses in India and Pakistan. Dr. Stephen Cohen, a South Asian security scholar who sadly passed away October 27th, once quoted Pakistani and Indian officials. What standing does Pakistan have in this dispute? What is their legal right? Pakistan is not party to a dispute. Let's get our facts right. Then we can discuss it. This was 1992. My view is that if India continues on its present course, then consequences cannot be foreseen. I cannot say where boundaries will be drawn, but certainly the present boundaries will be changed. India must be prepared to make a reasonable agreement. A senior Pakistani official. That sums it up. Rigidity between two nuclear-armed states. Ironically, in both countries, the regular armed forces are very cautious, since both armies have calculated the risks of a large-scale war and conclude that its outcome would be very uncertain, that collateral damage would be great, and that the possibility of escalation to a nuclear conflict is unacceptably high. But there are always possibilities for miscalculations. Step back. Since the 1950s, we can understand that beyond India and Pakistan, there are other interests. You see, Akskai Chin, China occupies that. It really means Akskai, rough terrain. But China has that, and we can't imagine that China is going to give that up. We also cannot discuss Jammu and Kashmir without discussing the aspirations of the Kashmiri people. The All Parties Hurriyat Conference, a loose confederation of Kashmiri separatist groups, believes that Kashmir should be independent of both India and Pakistan. And I came to know many of its initial leaders during my stay in the valley. The moderate faction of the Hurriyat, which means independence, led by the Mirwais Umar Farooq, opened bilateral talks with the Indian government in 2004. But they've complained that Delhi has not taken steps to create a conducive atmosphere for dialogue, such as the release of prisoners and the withdrawal of the laws that gave sweeping powers to the armed forces. Talks between the two sides last took place in 2006. So what to do? Should the global community ignore humanitarian challenges, ignore the aspirations of the Kashmiri people? Or would it cause conflict to listen to the Kashmiri people? Islamabad's official position is that Kashmir is disputed territory, whose final status must be determined by the people of Kashmir. India's position is that Kashmir is an integral part of India. The United States' position has evolved from accepting accession to supporting a plebiscite in disputed territory to now advocating a bilateral solution. In other words, we have punted. In August, President Trump twice offered to mediate between India and Pakistan. If you ever try to mention that word to the Indians, mediate, you would understand that's not something that they would be supportive of. A bipartisan group of senators, Van Hollen, Young, Cardin, and Graham, wrote in August to President Trump, raising their concerns about the ongoing situation in Kashmir. They urged him to take immediate action to help end the current humanitarian crisis and criticized both Pakistan and India. Senator Van Hollen asserted that New Delhi prevented him from visiting the valley on a recent trip. The Indian government has said that many in America are misinformed about the challenges it faces in the valley and that the Hindu community is under siege. At the United Nations General Assembly in September, Pakistani Prime Minister Khan raised fears about a nuclear war. He vowed to defend Pakistani territory and called Indian Prime Minister Modi a fascist. The population of Indian-administered state of Jammu and Kashmir is over 60% Muslim, making the only state in India that's majority Muslim. But Many in Pakistan argue that India's objective is to make it a Hindu state. Students, is there room for compromise? Americans always say that. The rest of the world says no. Okay? We always say that, but I don't know. Let me give you a little history of Kashmir. I can tell you, not only do they have the best tea in the world, the most expensive, so you'll never get it here. It has saffron. It is the most beautiful place I've ever been, without a doubt. And pashmina scarves, any women have pashminas? You know, it passes through your wedding band, a real one. It's truly beautiful, so it's so sad what's happened. But Kashmir is the ancestral home of Pandit Nehru, the first prime minister of India, and to many represents India's secular identity. To have a Pandit, a Hindu, come from a Muslim state. In India and Pakistan, independence is called partition when the nation was divided. So under the partition plan, Kashmir was free to accede to India or Pakistan. Maharaja Hari Singh, the ruler, wanted to stay independent, but eventually decided to accede to India in return for military aid and promised referendum. Some say that he was forced to do it, others say not, but in any case he did. And since then, India and Pakistan have fought two of their three wars in 1947 and 1965 over Kashmir. A demarcation line was established in January 1949 following the end of the First War. And since then, UNMOGIP, United Nations Military Observer Group in India and Pakistan, has been there since 1949. We have over 100 personnel. The United States pays about 28% of that budget for all peacekeepers around the world. So we've been paying since 1949. Somebody would say, is this a good deal? Should we be paying since 1949? No business would allow that without a solution. The key thing with this Article 370 of the Indian Constitution provided autonomy to Jammu and Kashmir. India rescinded the article this year using the Constitution. The law came into effect yesterday. So we'll see. We should expect some more protests. So how dangerous is the Kashmir dispute? It is potentially one of the most dangerous. Worst case scenario could trigger a nuclear conflict. Uh-oh. I'm sorry. As I was telling Dennis, technology is wonderful when it works. Okay. In 1998, India and Pakistan both declared themselves to be nuclear powers. In 2002, deployment of troops to both sides. 2002, attack on the Indian parliament. India said the attack was carried out by Pakistani-based militants. I was on the national security staff at that time, and we worked around the clock to prevent escalation. Only to be told later by Pakistanis and Indians that they were never going to war. They were just going to keep escalating. I can assure you that we did not know that. In 2008, Pakistani-based militants attacked Mumbai. And finally, in July of 2019, alleged mastermind of that attack, Hafiz Assad, was arrested. Many in India cynically said that the Pakistanis arrested Saeed prior to Imran Khan's visit to the U.S. and expect a return to support for the militants after his return. You think that happened? Did they arrest him just because Imran Khan was coming to Washington? I must say that when I was in the NSC staff, we used to joke, who are the Pakistanis going to arrest before one of Musharraf's visits? So this is quite plausible because somebody was always arrested before he visited. And do we really believe that Pakistan's military-led ISID, their military intelligence arm, didn't know where this person was? Right? This is where Osama bin Laden was, right? This is where Abu Sayyaf was hiding. Let's fast forward to February 2019. A suicide attack by a terror group suspected to be Jaish-e-Mohammed killed 40 Indian soldiers in Indian-controlled Kashmir. India responded with airstrikes deep into Pakistani territory, said they were targeting Jaish-e-Mohammed. Then Pakistani jets dropped bombs on India. Pakistan shot down 2 Indian jets. The Indians were shocked and many people were surprised. It captured 2 pilots. India denied that his pilots were captured. But the Pakistani pilots were turned over. So you have this back and forth, clashes, both sides doing things underhand, both sides doing something you can't do in an internet age. Lie about the obvious, right? Or you shouldn't do. And then in May of this year, over Chinese objections, and perhaps that they had been working on Islamabad's request, Jaish-e-Mohammed leader Masood Azhar was placed on the terrorist list. Please remember that name, Masood Azhar. But he is still free. So my point is there is no appetite in Delhi or Islamabad for middle ground. The best we can hope for is status quo. Maybe I'm too pessimistic. You are much younger than I am and always believe in shake hands and come out better, okay? But what we do know is that absent social and economic improvement for the population, there will be no permanent peace and security in the valley or between India and Pakistan. And you can see this around the world. So you got to understand the local environment, know whose interests, look at the aspirations. Are they being met? And you, as Democratic candidates, would try to get people to choose you. The Pakistanis and the Indians are not being chosen by the Kashmiris. They're not. Now we're going to step back to 1994. October 20th, 1994, Western tourists in India, 3 Britons and 1 American, were kidnapped. All 4 were successfully released 2 weeks later. July 4th, 1995, 6 Western tourists were kidnapped, and the militants demanded the release of Masood Azhar. Okay? Those militants call themselves Al-Faran. 1 American, John Charles, faked stomach cramps, diarrhea pains, and ran away. Al-Faran demanded that Masood Azhar be released, along with 22 other rebels. We refused. I was sent to Srinagar with British, German, and Norwegian diplomats. We had one laptop between us, candle lights at night, no heat, and trust me, Kashmir is colder than State College in the winter. We lived in a house on the Indian cantonment, which was shelled several times each day, and we were shore full of listening devices. Initially, U.S. Special Forces were deployed, but they soon departed. It was left to us to gain information and secure the release. We established relations with the All Parties Hurriyat Conference. We shared lots of tea with them, but we did not realize they did not have the influence to gain the victim's release. Although some of us spoke Hindi or Urdu, none of us understood the local culture of Kashmir. Everyone was willing to meet with us. All promised to assist and offered advice. And we reported everything to our embassies in New Delhi, Berlin, and London. We were peppered with questions. Our superiors never visited Kashmir either, and they only knew the history from the books and conversations with Indian and Pakistani diplomats. So you have to think, you're trying to solve a situation, you're being managed by people several thousand miles away who have never been in this situation. This is going to happen to you in your careers. It'll be fun sometimes. One day we awoke to the news that Norwegian Hans Christian Ostro's body was found beheaded. We asked why. Our interlocutor said because he was a difficult prisoner. We nodded, but on reflection, how did they know? How did they know since they weren't able to help us? Were they just playing around with us? I'll never know. While we were there in early 1996, Jalil Andrabi, a young lawyer, came to see me and explained that he was being trailed by the Indian military. He was being harassed. He asked if Kashmir was safe. I said yes, because I did not think he would be targeted. Andrabi was detained and killed. We were not able to see him, but we were then allowed to go to jail and meet several other detainees who told us they were being so well treated. But as we exited, we could hear blood-curdling screams. We knew that the prisoners were being abused, but we could not prove it. In March, Andrabi's body was found. I went to his house to pay my respects to his young widow. That day still haunts me. He was allegedly killed by Major Avtar Singh, who fled to Canada and then the United States, where he killed his wife, himself, and his children in California. I do not know what led him to shoot his family, but he too may have been haunted. In June 1996, we flew in specially trained German shepherds and walked the mountain ranges in a failed attempt to find our hostage. We were ordered back to Delhi. We failed. This is kind of interesting. You have Indian troops in Kashmir, and the sign says, "We want freedom." Is that sign okay? It's a nice sign, and that's what they do want. But you should always strike. It's written in English, right? It's written in English. So who was that for and who did it? Understand the culture. In December 1999, Indian Airlines Flight 814 was hijacked and landed in Afghanistan, leading to the release of Azar and several kidnappers by the Indian government. Omar Saeed Sheikh Mohammed, along with Azar, was given to a little-known imam named Mullah Umar. We didn't know anything about the Taliban. We did not have an embassy in Afghanistan. We could not listen. We did not try. And we forgot about Mullah Omar. I'm sure you know who he was. That time, Indian Home Minister L.K. Advani recorded in his own conversation with U.S. Ambassador to India, Robert Blackwell, "I'm seeking urgent assistance." But he was very angry at the Americans, saying that when the plane first landed in Dubai, Indian authorities were not allowed in the airport. But Americans were. That's strange because Blackwell wasn't the ambassador at that time. Advani was our ambassador was Dick Celeste, former governor of Ohio. So these sides keep perpetuating these tales that are full of falsehoods, propaganda. Later, we know that Omar Sheikh and Masood Azhar were involved in the kidnapping of the Wall Street Journal reporter Daniel Pearl, who was beheaded because he was Jewish. If we go back to 1995, Ramzi Youssef tried to set bombs off in 12 airplanes in the Philippines at the behest of his uncle, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who worked with Masood Azhar on 9/11. We missed all those signals. We failed to connect the dots. We did not learn the language or the culture until it was too late. Then we thrashed out in Afghanistan and Iraq in a manner that has not led to peace or democracy, and indeed strengthened those who are most at odds with our ideals. Some issues must be managed to avoid miscalculation in nuclear war. But I would say the violence has not abated, and we are no closer to permanent peace in Kashmir today than we were in 1949 or 1965. Thank you, and I'll be happy to take your questions.
All right, thank you. If you would just come up to one of the mics if you have a question, and we've got about half an hour for questions. Let me also, don't be shy, go ahead. I neglected to thank the Center for Security Research and Education and the Center for Global Studies, who helped, along with the School of International Affairs, make this event possible. Go ahead.
I'd like to make a small comment here. You mentioned a very good history of the Kashmir issue and the conflict. I think you missed out one very important aspect that's important to understand the overall picture. In 1990 and 1991, there was a massacre of Kashmiri Pandits in the valley, and 2,000 Kashmiri Pandits were killed, including men, women, and children, and over 60,000 of them were made to fled the valley, and till this day they are living in refugee camps all over India. You mentioned the important point that there was a possibility of a plebiscite. However, one of the conditions for the plebiscite was that the demographic does not change over the years. Moving out 60,000 people from the valley who still cannot go back and reside there is an important factor to consider, that why a plebiscite is not a very plausible solution. That's it. Thank you.
Yes, that was a terrible tragedy, but it would be hard to argue that 60,000 pundits could not go back to Jammu. That would be hard to argue. Okay, well, thank you all. Oh, yes, sir.
Hi, I am Pakistani, so there might be my biases and my to the other side. But taking my biases out, what do you think the election about 1987 and 88 that was mostly rigged? If that election was completely free and fair, how it would have changed? Because the resurgency and everything happened, started after that, once people's aspirations were not acknowledged, and that would not have led to the having things miscalculated and misdone to the both sides.
Thank you. You're 100% right that those local elections in the state were rigged, and that led a lot of young people to leave for Pakistan and engage and join terrorist groups. However, in 95, they had local elections, which were rigged again, but this time in favor of the separatists, because India was trying to get them in. And the separatists accepted the rigging because now they got to be members of the assembly. with patronage. So you rig against and rig in favor, and everybody accepts depending on how you're going to be treated. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question on the subject of lack of cultural understanding in regions that we engage in. Pakistan and India in the Kashmiri conflict isn't the first case where the United States really hasn't shown a understanding of the cultural differences, the cultural understanding. I mean, Vietnam, Iran, Afghanistan, just to name a few, all of these list a bunch of miscalculations because we didn't understand it. Now, do you believe there might be something inherent in our foreign policy culture, our bureaucracy, or our institutions that disallow or make it difficult to have a cultural understanding of where we engage in?
No, I think that what happens is you have certain priorities. And the issues you're talking about were in the era of the Cold War, when we said we were going to fight communism to the end of everything else. So when you put communism at the top, you're not looking at the aspirations of the local people. So, for example, President Johnson was not interested in anything in Africa. He didn't want anything to do with it. But when Tanzania, Zanzibar were getting their independence, he was afraid that they were going to go communist and asked the British to invade. Now, Tanzania was never going to be hostile, could never endanger American interests. But I just point that out to show you how much hysteria it was. So everything took second place to the Cold War. Then, after 2001, things took second place to the global war on terrorism. So in many ways, in Ethiopia and Somalia, we switched sides, right? Whom we supported, who the Russians supported. Some argue that our misunderstanding of the local culture there created Al-Shabaab, which was a clan, a bunch of different weakened clans. So that's why my point is you have to look at the macro and the micro and see if when you're doing the macro, what can you do to help the micro? Or you'll end up with these situations that we have failed in many times. Yes.
Thank you for your presentation.
Yes.
What, if at all, has the effect been of Modi's election in India, and specifically in regards to U.S. and I guess UK relations with India?
Well, you saw Howdy Modi, right? He was just in Texas, right? For the joint event with our president. Modi is from a Hindu nationalist party, and they were able to, through legal means, abrogate Article 370. His history and when he was chief minister was not one that was in accord with human rights, if you ask me, because so many Muslims were killed. And but both Obama and Trump have been close to him primarily because of Pakistan and Afghanistan. Again, subordinating macro and the micro. That's what I would say. However, I would say the India clearly is a democracy, flawed but a democracy. Pakistan is a fragile, much more fragile democracy when you're looking at those in comparison. India doesn't get enough credit for what it does, but it's failed in Kashmir and it's failed in the Seven Sisters on the other border with China. Yes.
So Imran Khan recently addressed, when he was doing his General Assembly speech to the UN, he talked about the Kashmir issue and he actually wanted the UN to intervene. And Prime Minister Modi had nothing to say on the issue and said focus on other things with India. So I was wondering, do you think that the UN will address this again? Do you think that this will be brought to a larger scale of attention, or do you think there's going to continue to just be a back and forth?
Well, how can the UN address it? We have UNMOGIP there since 1949. All right, we have security. The UN is very busy. Security Council, And to take up India and Pakistan would be very difficult. Realistically, China could veto on Pakistan's side anything. Okay, the U.S. or the U.K. would be pressured to veto anything on India's side. But the real deal is, the UN is powerless to compel New Delhi or Islamabad to do anything. I mean, because all you have is peacekeepers. You're not going to send peacemakers in, right? So that's why, on a realistic level, it's very difficult. UN is only powerful when the Security Council wants it to be powerful. Yes.
I was wondering if you think that part of the problem is that there's not a lot of global awareness of the Kashmir issue, and that if more people were aware of what was going on in Kashmir, there might be a greater push to find a solution.
It's been 70 years. I don't know. But we could say that about many areas of the world, whether it's Kashmir or Zimbabwe or the Rohingyas in Myanmar. There's so many areas like that. In this age of internet and an esteemed institution like this, I would expect that at least students know about it. But if you know about it, what are you going to do about it? You saw this is a bipartisan group of senators, and you have Van Hollen and Graham and Cardin agreeing on something. That's rare we see in domestic politics, but they're very concerned about it. Their staffs are concerned. We're in a very short time span in America, and that's why you young folks really have to be the ones who press the case to take the change and make change. But I can't tell you how difficult this will be. And I very much doubt that the Kashmiri people will get independence and that they will have a chance to decide on that. This will be India or Pakistan or status quo. Yes.
Ambassador, could you comment a little bit in some sort of comparison with the India, Pakistan, and Kashmir, and compare that with Israel, Palestine, and I'm particularly interested in the efforts around international solidarity around Palestine, Israel, and if you think there's potential for that in India, Pakistan, and if that would be productive, detractive, if that would have, what impact that might have.
I think that would be, thank you, I think that would be very difficult. You're asking the world leaders again to take on another issue, a major issue that's not threatening them at this point. And at this point, they have confidence that neither India or Pakistan are going to use nuclear weapons. That would be the only way. Because absent that, leave them to their own devices. And China's saying, this keeps India and Pakistan occupied with each other and not dealing with us. So I don't think that's going to happen. I don't like to compare suffering, whether you're in Palestine or Zimbabwe or the South Bronx, you're suffering. But at the same time, those people have been in those refugee camps it's almost the same time, or displaced like they are in Palestine, in Kashmir. And look at the Rohingyas now in Myanmar. It's going to be another 70-year issue. So what's the most important issue for the world to take up? We don't have attention span. A few years ago, we had Save Our Girls was a hashtag. Boko Haram. Those girls, about 170 of those girls are still under captivity. Is there a hashtag for that today? Right. So how are you going to get young people? How are you going to get the global community? How are you going to get countries interested in something that they deal with it when it's a crisis? As long as it's not a crisis, it can be managed. That's probably what's going to happen. I wish I could say that they deal with it out of right or wrong, morality. That's the fig leaf. You people are going to be the practitioners, all right? The fig leaf is the morality. The reality is, can we do this in them?
Thank you. I was wondering, since conflict is, of course, what we're trying to avoid here, if you could offer some insight as to what an escalation in conflict would look like as far as destabilization in the region, and possibly what U.S. involvement would be.
Thank you. The challenge is in the old days, when Dennis and I were in the Foreign Service, we could kind of see, or when the admirals and you could kind of see conflict coming up. You know, they're doing one thing, you're doing the other thing, but in terms of nuclear, what are our satellites telling us? What are our satellites telling us? Are our satellites correct? That would be the major thing to avoid that type of conflict. Indian and Pakistani troops going back and forth wouldn't be such a big deal to us. And this is what happens. Like when I was in the NSC staff, Dr. Rice would call you down to the Oval Office and say, Mr. President, remember Harry? You can't remember my name, right? You go in, you have talking points. The President calls the Prime Minister of Pakistan, calls the Prime Minister of India, says, damp down on it. You try to have the Brits do the same. Chinese not so much. Maybe you have somebody say something in the UN. You let India and Pakistan vent that you Western colonialists shouldn't be getting yourselves in our business. And you take that and you kind of damp it down to the next go around. That's what happens. Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. As you probably know, the Kashmir region has the highest soldier to civilian ratio in the world. And they've been accused of using rape as kind of a cultural weapon and other aspects of fear. So what what role does fear play in India's control of the Kashmir region when they want ultimately to take in Kashmir as a state of India?
Okay. Well, a couple of things. One, when I lived in India, how many troops they lost in Kashmir was not an issue. It didn't move the public, like when we were losing a lot of troops in Afghanistan or Iraq, that started to move people against the war. That was not an issue. I'm not saying they don't love their children. I'm just saying that wasn't an issue. Second, sexual assault by troops, unfortunately, is abhorrent and takes place everywhere there are troops. Comes down to leadership of the military who's in charge and what you do to those people who engage in sexual assault. In many places around the world, including some UN missions, history shows that people who engage in sexual assault have not been punished for it or even shamed for it. But let's remember, Pakistan has part of Kashmir also, not just India, as does China. So it's not just beat up on India, and it's not just that India has a far better democratic history, longer than the other countries in the region. So I think that all three would eventually have to agree to something, but there's no compulsion for them to do it right now. That's not that. India's democracy decided we're going to abrogate 370, right? Not do anything to bring them into the fold, and that's been popular.
Thanks for a lovely talk, Ambassador. So I'm not a political science expert, I'm a scientist. Kashmir has been going on for 70 years. It's a disputed territory. The people that are most affected by the conflict are Kashmiris themselves. And it makes sense to me, the most intuitive way for people to come about a solution is to give the decision in the hands of the Kashmiris. If they're happy with the Indian side, they should be able to choose India as a state. If they're not happy with India, they should be able to choose independence as well from both India and Pakistan. So why don't we let them decide on their future? And this might just be the fact that I'm naive to how politics actually works, but this sounds like the most intuitive solution. Why don't they get to decide their future? And how do you think we can catalyze?
Unfortunately, in most places, you get to decide your future if you have guns. Okay? No, I mean, that's been reality, right? Somebody else go to war over that. India and Pakistan do not want to let them decide their future. And So we're not going to see that. If you look at recent Somaliland, Somalia, Somaliland, Eritrea, Djibouti, Ethiopia, they all broke off from Ethiopia, but with guns. American Revolution, guns, all right? South Africa, independence, Cuba sending troops in to fight the South African troops, and South Africa said it's not worth it. That's what happens. That unfortunately is not going to happen in Kashmir. And there is no reason for India or Pakistan. What reason do we have for India or Pakistan to allow these people to decide their will?
Thank you for coming today and speaking to us. You talked about the short memory span and attention span of the general public.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, does a conflict lose relevance within the State Department over time as well?
No, we go from crisis to crisis. But the India and Pakistan desk officers are always dealing with Kashmir. The assistant secretary it's always part of India's strategy. Obviously, after 9/11, that went down, right? It was trying to get both India and Pakistan on our sides, but because it's those individuals' jobs to track this, they're more focused on it than anybody. A Secretary of State, no matter who that person is, has a plan, strategic plan, a lengthy plan of what he or she wants to do over years. But the reality is they get derailed by crises. And then they have to deal with that, but that's why they have subordinates that we hope they put trust in to execute them.
All right.
Yes.
Hi there, Ambassador Thomas. Thank
Yes.
you very much for being with us.
Yes.
I was wondering, essentially, how does Kashmir fit into India's regional foreign policy? Does it use it as a way to distract and occupy Pakistan, or does it actually fit into a long-term regional policy?
Thank you. I'm not sure it fits into a regional more than a domestic policy. Indians really feel that Kashmir is theirs. And they really feel that they were that Kashmir rightly acceded to India and its democracy. But in terms of regional, and if any Indian prime minister who says, I'm going to give up Kashmir, would be out of office tomorrow. So I don't think that is in terms of its regional policy. Its regional policy basically is, we're close to Afghanistan. We've always been close to people in Afghanistan because Afghanistan doesn't have good relations with Pakistan. We're close to Iran because Iran doesn't have good relations with Pakistan. You know, the enemy of my enemy is my enemy. I'm making it pretty simplistic here, though. But their biggest focus is going to be on China. You don't forget that part of China, that part that China occupied, it did during the Sino-Indian War in 1960. And India was greatly embarrassed by that, may have hastened Pandit Nehru's death, but more importantly, he felt betrayed because in the 50s, he was offered a seat on the Security Council to replace Taiwan, to keep what was then called Red China from being on the Security Council. So India could have been on the Security Council. They have long memories in India, not like we have here in the United States. So I think it really does not focus into their regional policy, except that we're going to keep it. And we don't want incursions from Pakistan or China, and let's keep each other busy.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
So, given that all of these issues can trace their roots back to the English colonialism and the English, how rapidly they attempted partition at the end.
Even before that, the Sikhs occupied Kashmir.
Is there any call for England to be more involved in trying to resolve this dispute, either internationally or locally, because this can be traced back to them, or is it a general view that they should stay away now?
I think they're rather busy. Right?
Well, yes. Currently, yes.
They are rather busy. Yeah, obviously the colonial power always has a lot more influence, and it's they're the ones that know that country best as outsiders. But what are they going to bring to the table? Right? What are you going to bring to the table? President Carter got Sadat and Begum to sit down because he was able to offer them billions. Right? So what can the UK, with all due respect, offer? I don't think much. Our great allies, our cousins, we work so closely with them. But at this point, I don't think they have the wherewithal. I don't think we do either unless we want to really be involved in something nasty. Yes?
Considering India holds like economic interests with many large countries like UK, US, European Union, and with Angela Merkel making this, Angela Merkel using she made a statement today saying that Kashmir is in a very devastating state. But the Indian government is saying, they did the first examination today in Kashmir. They're trying to make things boil over. Do you think that India is going to try to slowly just kill the issue in the media and try to assimilate Kashmir?
Yes, they will. But history shows us around the world that until people's aspirations are being met, you're going to have periodic uprisings, whether it's in the south part of the Philippines with MILF, in Indonesia with Abu Sayyaf. All of these things come out of local grievances not being met. Okay, always. That's what these come out. Can you meet every grievance? No. But if it's constantly coming up, there's a reason, right? People don't want to go to war. They want to live peacefully. They want their children to do well. They want safety and security. But when those things are not being met, yes, you can damp down for a short time, but sooner or later it will boil up. If you go look at the Philippines, General Pershing was there in 1912. We had special forces when I was there 2010 to 2013, and they're still fighting between Muslims and Christians over land and identity to this day. And the Philippines in the 60s and 70s moved poor Christians into Mindanao. And now they are the majority population over the Muslims, but it's still not peace. So if India thinks just by making Jammu and Kashmir a majority pundit state is going to bring peace, they're wrong.
Thank you, Ambassador, for sharing your knowledge with us. As you have indicated in your remarks, it seems that, to unfortunately quote a certain organization, both states have been quite strategic in their management of savagery. With that in mind, do we generally see more violence under populist governments? And if so, is there really any role for the United States to play in possibly influencing the states other than just strongly worded?
I don't think we see more violence under populist governments. We see, and you can't judge safety and security by violence or lack of it, because the security apparatus in a place like the former Soviet Union or in places like Uganda is so pervasive that everybody that rises up will die or be shot. So that masks it. I'm sorry, but at the end of the day, sooner or later in these countries, you go in, you go out as you came in. You come in violently, you go out violently. People suffer, people die. We're looking for a role for the United States in Pakistan and India for Kashmir. The reality is everything that we have tried has not worked. We do confidence building measures, we do youth exchange, we try to give aid and assistance. None of that has brought us permanent peace. So you ask why? It's because you're putting bandages on a patient instead of operating and bringing the patient to heal. I see Dennis here, so I know this is it, but I will say thank you for having me. But also, I forgot when one of the students said, "What do you think?" I'm retired now. I can say what I want. I forgot about that. Still trying to pretend like I'm still working for the government. So it's great to be able to say some of the things I would like to say.
All right, and we're glad you said them with us and shared those thoughts.
Thank you.
Great presentation, Harry. Thank you all for the questions.